Good afternoon. My name is Russ Cosentino. I'd like to say Yobo Seyao. It's great to be here in Seoul, South Korea, and to talk a little bit about analyzing data in a connected world. I'm one of the co-founders of Zoomdata, and my team runs the channel sales for the organization. And we started the company about 6 years ago with the objective of rethinking how people take advantage of modern data in a connected world. So as we go through our discussion here, some of our topics are going to range around streaming strategies. What are some of the best practices that companies in this space are utilizing to take advantage of data in this world? The next thing is to do a couple of use cases where we'll highlight a credit card company and a pharmaceutical company that are dealing with huge amounts of data that's active and live, and how they have gone ahead and addressed those solutions. And then finally, we'll include some demonstrations so you can see this data in action. So let's kick it off. I think everyone's probably seen this chart before, and it's pretty interesting. What it's doing is just highlighting what a connected world we live in. There are devices in pretty much everything that we touch today, whether it's an airplane that's tracking the fuel left in an airline, whether it's a heart monitor in a hospital looking at your heart, or whether it's a vending machine tracking the dispensing of soda drinks in those machines. As businesses, we are now dealing with a wealth of data that's active in real time, and we're challenged in how to take advantage of that information. And so when I always think about it, I like to always kind of ask myself, is this real too? And so, we did some research and we kind of looked around in the space and wanted to get a sense of how many devices are actually out there. And we've tracked down a couple of numbers, but this is kind of typical, that there's 24 billion IoT devices out there, 24 billion mechanisms that are in devices, in products, in applications that are tracking the performance and activity of these products. And they're spewing off information all day long. And this is only going to continue to grow. And so one thing that we always have to ask ourselves is, does the traditional applications, are they going to help us be successful in monitoring this data? And as we go through this discussion, you'll probably come to the conclusion that just like we're implementing all these devices to capture new types of information, we also have to rethink the entire way in which we process this information. And when I say process this information, think of this. A long time ago, or not that long ago, data was thought of in batches. We would go ahead and have a production system that would go ahead and manufacture some products. At the end of the night, we'd capture some data and we upload it into a system. That data is what we would refer to as being static. But today's systems are not static, whether it's a supermarket, whether it's a social media system, whether it's a production line. Data is active and data is being generated 24/7. So the days of the 24-hour reporting cycle are kind of toast. No one wants to wait till tomorrow to hear what their data is telling them today. So as a business, we have to begin to rethink what those tools are going to be that will help us take advantage of that information. And as this information is being generated, the next thing that comes to mind is how much. And so I love this chart because when we started the company, we were thinking about this. We actually saw this chart a long time ago, and it's been great to see it come to life as the years have passed. But not too long ago, we were only dealing with 2.8 zettabytes. And that's the data being stored in the Oracle systems or the Teradata systems or SAP systems. And they haven't grown much over the years. You can see that we're only maybe doubled in size over 8 years. But there's a whole new class of systems that are out there now that are generating data at a much faster rate at a much higher scale. And that's this space here. And these are the sensors, the server logs, the click streams, the social media. I mean, we work with a cybersecurity solution. That solution alone generates 150 terabytes of data a year, just tracking log analytics information from various devices in the organization. 150 terabytes, just one system. Multiply that by thousands, and we can begin to recognize how much data is out there for us to address and take advantage of within our companies. So let's go down a little further and look at a batch system. So I love looking at this because this is when we started the company. We saw this happening. We saw that we had all of our real-time data systems that were just coming to life, and back then it was CDH. But people would dump their data into something like CDH, and they would use a traditional ETL batch processing tool. So remember the Informaticas, the Talons, they did a marvelous job of taking data out of some of these systems. and basically putting them into a redundant repository, like a cube or a schema, something that's always proprietary, something managed by the BI company. And after it was put in that system, you'd have your traditional BI server. And again, MicroStrategy, BobJ come to mind, Tableau. And what they do is they would interact with the data sitting here in this cube. And then the user would go ahead and look at reports that were typically prescribed by some engineer who said, you know what, these are the bits of data that you're going to actually take advantage of and look at. So when we're talking, you know, when these systems were built, 10, 20 years ago, we weren't dealing with a lot of data. We didn't have a high degree of cardinality in our data sets. We were dealing with smaller data sets and small number of fields. But today, the systems change, and you start seeing holes in this process when you think that we're storing duplicate copies of data. If we have our data sitting here in Cloudera, why would we want to have a second copy of that data stored in another reporting system? And the other question we ask ourselves is why is this going to cost us more money? Why are we going to have an investment here and then make a second investment here? The next thing that we think about is just the roadblocks to the data access. So if I'm an engineer, or I'm sorry, if I'm a like a Tableau user, and I want to go ahead and maybe pull this new data stream that's coming in here, or maybe someone appended a column into a data table. Well, I got to pick up the phone, I got to call the engineer. The engineer is going to go ahead and modify the table, and then eventually it will make its way there. But of course, I got to stand in line to get that accomplished. And then the last thing, and this is the most important thing, is this does not support big data. Our customers, they're dealing with tens of billions, hundreds of billions of data points sitting in SDX. Do you think you could put that much data into a cube and do reporting on it and get performance? No, it's impossible. So many times when our customers come to us and say we're deploying this, and then they go ahead and show us that they're going to use this cube, we're like, well, why'd you make that investment if you're not going to modernize to a modern BI tool? And that's where we come back and we say, look, traditional BI systems, and whether it's the BI system or it's the Hadoop data environment, the Oracle data environment, they don't scale. And so our customers, our businesses, have to think of a new approach of dealing with the modern BI architecture. And so, again, let's look at our system here. We now have the data generator. And now we have a new class of systems that really didn't exist 5, 10 years ago. We have things like Storm and Kafka, which are managing the messages for us. Then we turn to stream processing tools like Spark and NiFi that are helping us to transform the data and get the data ready for being processed and analyzed. Now, I got to highlight our company here too, because we do focus on streaming data. And when you think of the Zoomdata application, we actually have connections into the real-time streaming tools that would allow you then to immediately display the data directly to the user. But what we're also really big fans of is that when this data comes out of here, we put it into what we call data sync. Data sync is something like, again, Cloudera, and then what we would do is leverage an interactive query capability of like Impala or Kudu or Solar to go ahead and have an active experience with this data. And what's really cool about this is that this is great for high degree of concurrency at scale with a lot of users trying to tap into the tool. And so this is much different than that traditional BI system because we've gotten rid of that redundant storage environment. So streaming data, that's possible through a modern BI tool, not possible through a traditional BI tool. When we think about data sharpening and data DVR, these are capabilities now that are leveraged by a modern BI platform because they're essentially taking the query to the data. So as users interact with Zoomdata, Zoomdata is processing queries against the data here and then sending it back here. What we're doing is we're leveraging the power of microqueries. And what microqueries do is burst the query against all the nodes in the cluster. Each node does its job, and then it sends the results back to the user experience, thereby creating a super fast experience for the business user. And finally, the interactive queries is what drives a real-time experience. So what we like to think about is the user experience as well. And just diving into this a little bit more, into this modern BI platform and this interactive query with the data sync and how we support a live mode. So this is a really important function of a modern BI tool, and this is the ability to do the continuous query against the modern data set. And within a BI tool like Zoomdata, you have the ability to activate what we call a live mode. And with a live mode, you're essentially establishing a refresh rate so that every second I want to go ahead and run a query on this data set. As I run that query, I'm going to append the new data to that visualization, and then I'm going to deprecate the older data. And I'm going to do it by seconds. I could do it minutes, hours, and days. There's another concept here, too, and it's what we call rolling hour, or a rolling day, or a rolling week, or a rolling minute. And that lets us look at all the data coming through the system in that period of time. So when we think of modern BI tools, two things come to mind. One is big data. Modern BI, big data. If you're dealing with hundreds of millions, billions, tens of billions, hundreds of billions of data points, you need a modern BI tool. A traditional BI tool won't do it in real time. Again, a traditional BI tool, it's impossible to do real-time streaming and analytics on it. A modern BI tool helps you do that. So when we think of this, the traditional systems, they don't scale. Modern systems, they help you solve big problems. So next thing I want to just talk about real quickly is just the use cases. So I always find this interesting, where we have customers that want to monitor data, and they always think of it in just the standpoint of a single device, as opposed to tracking multiple devices across the organization and aggregating the information. The next thing is just looking at the data that we want to analyze, and modern tools are going to focus on streaming analytics, and they're going to make data actionable and reactive in sub-second. Historical traditional systems are typically looking at reactive data. So, use case. I'm just going to highlight a company called Cielo. They are a Brazilian credit card company that processes about 1.1 million transactions per year. In their system, they are continuously looking at these transactions all day long against 1.5 million devices. We've gone ahead and deployed ActiveMQ to extract transactions from their mainframe environment. We then use Flume to channel the transactions so that Kafka can publish them. And what they do is they publish them to Spark Streaming, which does some more data enrichment, and then we put it into what we call our data sync. And once it's in the data sync, Zoomdata has its connectors and its server that are able to help the user have an interactive experience. And the cool thing here is that these types of systems, this supports 21,000 transactions per second, and they have hundreds of users and monitors located throughout their company. So think about that. These guys now have instant access to all this data here. And so let me just take you through a quick demo that highlights the real-time capabilities of a tool like Zoomdata and how we could look at 10 billion rows of data. So I'm going to open up this particular visual here. It says 10 billion rows of data. So at Zoomdata, we've set up a server. It's about a 6-node cluster, and we've loaded 10 billion rows of data. Now remember, I told you something about data sharpening. And so with data sharpening, I'm now looking at 11 billion rows of data right now, and I don't know if you can see it from where you are, but it says about 25%, 51%. So what it's doing is bursting queries against all those nodes, and then as those results come back, we're displaying them to the user, and we call that data sharpening. You can see each one of these charts is in some portion of being completed. Now, I'm going to just click on this one, and it's only about 19% of the way through, and I'm going to zoom in. Now, when I zoom in, I'm going to zoom in, say, by user income. Now, what just has happened is we've gone ahead and we've killed a query, and we started a new query. And in fact, I don't have to wait. I can go ahead and zoom in again, and I can look at this, say, by group. And now I'm looking at the group of information here. And I went ahead and redid this. So if you're connecting to big data, if you're doing any sort of reporting on big data, think about this. We just clicked through 10 billion rows of data in about 30 seconds. That's the power of a modern BI tool that a traditional BI tool won't work with. And when you connect it to a modern data environment, such as Cloudera, then you are in the zone when it comes to analyzing big data. So how this is possible is through our connector. So I'm going to jump into the sources here and highlight the new connectors that are out there today. So Zoomdata has what we call smart connectors. our smart connectors are optimized for each one of the data sets that we connect to. Some data environments have characteristics around unstructured data and nesting and facets. Other ones are great for analytic database. So we've configured each one of our connectors to capitalize on those different capabilities. So let's jump in here, and I'm going to highlight this 10 billion rows data set. So this is a data set that we're just looking at. And it's really easy to come in here and establish this connection to that environment using a JDBC URL. And again, this has been designed by us to take advantage of all the capabilities of, say, Impala in this instance. Now think about this. Now that we've made this connection, I'm now looking at all the tables that are sitting on that instance. And I can activate or deactivate particular fields, and I can also get a preview of the data that's here as well. The next thing I do is configure the fields. And sometimes I may want to deactivate a field. Sometimes I may want to change the type. I may want to establish some ranges. I might want to change the format of the field. I have lots of capabilities here to configure each field in that environment. And then the next thing we do is look at the charts. So Zoomdata comes bundled with all these charts, but I can also build custom charts and apply those to the application. Now remember, we're talking about modern BI, and we're talking about streaming. This is where the cool thing is. I love this part about our application, is this is where I turn on the time attribute. And now I can enable playback, and I'm going to show you playback in a moment. That's the data DVR. And I'm going to enable live mode. And what live mode does is it goes ahead and it updates every second. And I can establish what we call a rolling hour. And what we're going to do is update this to view to look at a rolling hour of data. Once I'm done, I can hit save. In this case, I'm going to cancel it. So let's look at this now, and let's look at some real data. So I come in here to my data sources, and I'm just going to type in a real-time data set. And we'll just open it up with a bar chart. So as this begins to load up, I want you to take notice that these charts are changing colors. The bars are changing ever so slightly. So this is a real-time data stream coming into the system. So imagine you're running a production environment. You have machines that are spinning off information. All that information can make it into a tool like Zoomdata so that you have the real-time insights into that data. Now here's the cool part, the data DVR. This is what we were highlighting a few seconds ago. If I just go ahead and take this data DVR and I slide to the left, I'm now going to redraw this chart in a different time window. I also have the ability to pause this, and maybe what I want to do is look at this at a day per second and hit play, and it'll go ahead and it'll replay all the data as well. Now, like any BI tool, we have the ability to do our deep dives, and if I want to zoom in and look at this, say, by gender, or if I want to drill down a little bit or if I want to apply we can just drill down and look at this by, say, state or category. And so now we're looking at male shoppers and rings. Now I have a filter on there still called rings, so I can take that off. And now I just go back and I look at all the male shopper activity. Now, this is self-service BI. So what I can do is also add in another chart, maybe a donut chart. And remember, we were just looking at that 10 billion row data set, right? I can just hit this. Now, I've got a 10 billion row data set as well as these real-time data sets that are all showing up in that same chart. And we can also do the things like cross-filtering visualization. And I can go ahead and click on this and hit apply, and it will filter that chart by gender. So those are some of the key capabilities around real-time and big data. What I'd like to do now is just jump back into the use cases. And to follow up with the Cielo experience. So for Cielo, this is the head of IT and CIO, Marcelo. For him, a modern BI tool is a game changer for his organization. This is really cool. These are some of the cool stats. They used to have a 14-day report that would take 14 hours. They had a 5-year report that took 30 days to run. All these reports now run in a matter of seconds or minutes at best. The tool is important for them because they have to do SLA monitoring. Remember, we're talking about a credit card company, and they have to make sure that those machines are running on schedule. So we are able to provide all that information back to them to make sure all those devices are running properly. There's also now been an opportunity to do marketing. So in the past, they had all these corporate dashboards, they were not able to display them in real time. But now they've displayed these dashboards throughout the entire company, so that now they can see where their machines are throughout the day as far as it relates to performance. And it also creates some opportunities now where they can begin to do cohort analytics. This is essentially pulling together data from multiple groups and then creating offers that they can send to those groups based on their transaction history. And the last thing is they can syndicate data. So for the Brazilians, we all know World Cup is a pretty popular sport. And they were using their real-time system. And when Brazil was playing during the World Cup this past year, they noticed that transaction volume would dip by 23%. So now what they do is they syndicate this information. Another example, when they decided to employ a gas tax, they were then able to analyze the downstream effect of that gas tax by not only the taxi drivers, but then also the people that sold gas and brought gas to airports, and the effect it had at airports, and it had here and there. And then they're able to understand the effect of these changes in the business by the government that would have on their people. So let's keep going through some of the use cases. And the next one I'm going to highlight is a deep dive in analytics around a pharmaceutical company. So this is GlaxoSmithKline. They're a $38 billion pharmaceutical company. They have 92 different pharma products, but they also have 5 petabytes of data. So think of the researchers, the clinicians that are in a firm like this. These folks have to look at data all day long. They're looking for patient information to identify new problems to solve. They're looking at insurance information to relate conditions to prescriptions that were given. They're looking at government data. There's just all this data sitting out there. And what would happen in the old days is that people would go ahead and write queries. They'd go home, grab a cup of coffee, come back the next day, and the results were there. Now, to develop a new drug, it takes anywhere from 10 to 20 years. And a good chunk of that time is just spent running queries and analyzing the data. So we've been working with the company to develop a new approach. There we go. Sorry about that. To help them understand what's going on in their data environment. And it begins with the source systems. So Glaxo runs about 25,000 trials a year. And the information from those trials could be collected from South Africa or a tribe in Nigeria. And all this information could be sent via text message. It could be an Excel file. It could be some sort of data capture system on the cloud. They have so many different ways to capture this information. And what they have to do is find ways to put it into one environment. And so when it comes to the database systems, that's probably the easiest things where they just go ahead and load it into Cloudera. They use stream sets a lot for the APIs that come from some of their SaaS systems to dump that information there. Sometimes they have files that they want to upload and they use Kafka, and sometimes they have messages that they want to upload into the system. And once that data is there, they'll do some data wrangling. So our partner Trifacta is here, and they play an important role for these types of environments because many times what you could have, and they find this by analyzing all the data, is that you could be studying one drug, but the folks in Nigeria are underrepresented compared to folks in other parts of the country, which leads to miscalculations in how they want to develop these drugs. And when you start using tools like Trifacta that can help you wrangle the data, you start bringing order to the massive information that they're dealing with. So then we look at the data discovery. And within the data discovery, we have the connectors. Remember, we have the smart connectors and then the servers. And then we have our users that, of course, exploring the data, validating data, and distribution. Now, sometimes we have the data scientists. And this is always interesting for the data scientists who might want to use some Python notebooks, maybe something from Anaconda. And they want to build their own connections into the data, extract the data out to do some reporting and analytics. And when they do that, they would tap into the Zoomdata server. Most times they don't connect here. They just leverage our connectors and our APIs to then pull that data out and view that in those particular notebooks. So let's go ahead and highlight how we can take advantage of a search database and do fusion against the data set as well. And again, for a company that has data coming from all these different environments, being able to fuse that information is incredibly important to them. So we're going to jump into our Cloudera instance here. Then you're more than welcome to go to this too. It's cloudera.zoomdata.com, and the login and password's Cloudera. And I'm just going to pop up a search database and just kind of highlight how, when we're dealing with search data, how we can also take advantage of unstructured search in that environment. And when you think of clinical trials for Glaxo, almost all their data is being loaded into Cloudera Search Solar. And the reason being is that those clinicians, when they're out in the field collecting data, they type a lot of stories, a lot of paragraphs of information. So putting that data into a traditional analytics database isn't very helpful. I'm going to jump to this box here. I think I might be having a connection issue. Let's see. Here we go. So here, I've got a really small data set. It's only 255,000 rows of data, but it's hotel review data. And what I can do is come in here and say, type in the word rooms. So this is a text search in a BI tool. Again, like a traditional BI tool, they're always dealing with just structured data. With a modern BI tool, whether it's structured, semi-structured, unstructured data, you have that ability now. And so I typed in the word rooms, and now what I do is I get a list of all the records where the word rooms is mentioned. And if I scroll down a little further, I can see my column headers. Now, these are essentially facets, and facets count the occurrences of words in the column. And when I click on the facets here, I can start seeing, hey, Beijing, 3,700 records, San Francisco, 23,000, Las Vegas, 22,000. So, let's clear this, and let's put in my favorite and just type in something called bed bugs. So now when I type in bed bugs, I drop down from 200,000 to only 40 records. And I can click on my facets, and I can again see the cities here. As I click on these cities, they start to pop up here in the view. So let's go ahead and do a zoom into, say, Shanghai, and look at the hotels. And we see it's a Sofitel. So that's the culprit in Shanghai when it comes to bed bugs. And I can click on my details, and then we'll get the record to pop up that contains that bed bug information. So the old way that a data scientist would get to this information at GSK is that they would have to write queries. The new way, they pop into a modern BI interface that's optimized for modern data, and they can go ahead and just search on the data here. Now, the next thing that's really important is looking at data across the enterprise from all the different, oh, geez, I went through all that. Sorry, guys. Thanks for raising your hand. Did it sound good? Let's see. You see that? Okay. I'm going to just go through this real quick because this is really important. Is we're just highlighting in the old days how companies like GSK would get access to unstructured data. So if they were to go ahead and say they wanted to look at all the rooms in a data set, they'd have to write a query. Here, we've built a smart connector with a modern BI tool that allows them to leverage things like facets and do deep dives into the data. And then they can go from here and zoom in and say, look at hotel names and get a list of all the hotels where people might have mentioned things like rooms. And then they can go ahead and look at the details. And then this will give a list of all the information of where all the hotel rooms were listed. And of course, all this information can be exported or saved into another system. But the point here, though, is that when we think of modern BI in a connected world with huge amounts of data, we can't rely on those traditional systems to get access to data because they're time consuming. We want to use automation to get access to the information, and that's what we're highlighting here. So the last demo that I want to highlight has to deal with data fusion. So in the enterprise, we all deal with data that's from all different systems. And what we want to do here with this capability is allow users to push down queries to fuse the data together. So I have a data set here called Ticket Marketplace Fusion. So this is a fused data source. And when I come into this data source, oops, Let me just see what's going on here. I might have clicked on the wrong one. There we go. I'm sorry, I apologize. I clicked on the wrong example. So here, I've loaded a bunch of data into the Zoomdata application, and I have 4 different sources that I collect in. It's just this easy to add additional sources. When I click next here, now I have the ability to build this fused view of the data. So when I click down on, say, S3 sellers, I can drag and drop attributes, and I can begin to build that fused view of the data. After I've done that, I get a combined view of all this information. Now here, I've created some new attributes. One that's called seller, one that's called event, one that's called listing. And I have this one event listing here where I have a name called Events Fusion, and then I have some IDs here, which are integers. And what I'm doing now is creating a single fused view of that data. So we'll go ahead and come back to our chart, or go back to our home page here, and I have my connector here called Fusion Dashboard. So when I open up this chart, I've got a pre-built view of all this data here, and I click on one of these charts here, and I can zoom in, and I can see all the different attributes that are here. But that's a combination of all the data. Let's see if we just pull up one of the charts and have that one data set sitting in S3. And we'll just open up, say, a pack bubbles. And so as I do this, you can see that the list of attributes is not as big, but the fused view has all the different attributes. So now in one view, I'm looking at 4 different data sets. Now, let's take this a step further, and let's do some analytics on this particular data set. So I'm just going to go ahead and turn this to configure. And now I have the ability to add event names or change event names. Now, as you may recall, we created a attribute called event name. Now I can toggle back and forth now between the actual event ID and the event name. Because what I had was one file that just had event names, and I had a bunch of other files that had event IDs. Now I have one fused view that lets me look at all of the data in that particular environment. The next thing I'll highlight is looking at the average sold. So this is a formula where I can create a new formula here and go through a process, or I'm just going to show one that has already been created. Now in this particular formula, what I'm doing is an average ticket price sold. So I'm looking at a Mongo data set, and this could be hosted in Malaysia in an AWS environment. And then the ticket sold here, this is actually an Impala table, and this could be sitting somewhere in Europe. So what's going to happen is we run this chart. It's going to go ahead and query results, and then run the calculation on the fly and produce that for the user. So all I have to do here is hit average sold, and it's going to run that calculation. And it went ahead and added it to this list already. So those are some of the features of looking at a real-time environment. So the last thing that we want to highlight, and this one is a little interactive. Now, we're talking about analyzing data in a real world. Whoops. And I just have to get my phone set up to just go to a particular text number. So if anyone feels like texting a number here, you can text, say, to this number here, 201-8099, and you can type in a fruit, and we're going to go ahead and say, we'll say kiwi, and we'll put in an amount, and I'm just going to put in 1,000. And I'm going to hit send right now. So now what happened is, oh, it did not work this time. Huh. Because it's international on my phone, I was working when I tested it, and I came up across an error right now, so we'll bypass that. But what I wanted to highlight here was just an example of a architecture here, where we have producers that are cell phones that can stream data through Kafka, and then as we receive those orders, we add them to Solar, and then once they're in Solar, we have the Zoomdata server connected to that data. Remember, we have our live mode on, and we're able to do our visualizations through that particular interface. And through an interface like Zoomdata, we have our time bar that allows us to go backwards in time and look at all the data showing up in the chart. So let's see if we get this to pop up. So I just would like to wrap this up and just talking about today's challenges. So when we think of a connected world and taking advantage of all the data that's out there, being able to design systems that support big data in an interactive experience is crucial. No longer can we use systems that extract data from a modern data store, say like Cloudera, and put it into a redundant repository for visual analytics, because those systems don't scale, and they're costly, and they don't give the user access to all the information. The next thing is just looking at the diversity of data. No longer can we build systems that are just made to connect to SQL. We have to support a diverse set of data, whether it's sitting in a cloud database like Snowflake, whether it's Impala or Search or Kudu, or a traditional data set like HANA. We're looking for one system nowadays that can connect, stream, and visualize data regardless of the system that it's in. And the next thing is real time. So I can't say this enough, this is really important to all the customers we speak to in the big data space, is that they can't wait till tomorrow to get the data. As data is being generated, it needs to find its way into the data sync and then have tools that can report on the data sync immediately. So with that, just want to wrap it up. Again, Zoomdata is a company that's focused on visual analytics. We've always had this vision of how we wanted to find a new standard for how people interact, consume, and take advantage of data. We work with a lot of great partners in the space, Cloudera being one of our most important partners since we started the company. And we have a lot of customers in different industries, whether it's in finance or government or telecommunication, and the list goes on. But the one thing that all of our customers deal with is the need to address a big data challenge. So we're over there in the lobby if you want to talk some more, or if you want to contact us, you can reach us at info@zoomdata.jp. And we have about 2 minutes left on the clock, so if there's any questions, I have a few minutes to take questions. All right. Well, hey, thank you for your time.